All right, so we took a look at some hello world directives. Let's talk a little further on some of the idiosyncrasies of working with directives. Okay, so here in my hello HTML, let's create yet another tag here, and let's call it lorem ipsum. Right? And what would you suggest this do? Right? Presumably it would just generate this dummy data. Right? We just fill in with this dummy data. Notice the naming convention of this tag. Right? In HTML, there is no casing. Right? Tags can either be capital or lowercase. The browser doesn't care. It does not distinguish between uppercase and lowercase, as opposed to in JavaScript. In JavaScript, it does matter, right? So we're going to follow the convention in HTML that all the tags are going to be all lowercase, right? And that if there are many words if you have a very long name for a tag, we're going to use dashes, right? So that's the convention we're going to follow. It's a very common convention in the industry. Certainly we're going to need to follow it within Angular. Angular requires, right, if you want to use directives, right, it requires that the names of the tags follow this naming convention. Okay. Now on the JavaScript side, let's declare the directive that goes along with that tag. Okay. So directive. Now we mentioned earlier that the names of the tag need to match exactly with the names of the declaration here. Where you have this, you copy this, and you bring it over here. But in JavaScript, dashes are not an appropriate naming convention, right? So the appropriate naming convention in JavaScript typically is some camel casing, right? A mechanism where each word, where it starts with a lowercase, and then each new word is capitalized, right? The first letter. So, for instance, a proper name would be this, lorem ipsum over here, right? So, Angular follows this naming convention, right? In the HTML, you will be all lowercase with dashes, whereas in the JavaScript, it's camel cased, right? And it knows to do the conversion, right? It normalizes all of these and converts lorem ipsum, replacing all dashes and in the first lowercase to an uppercase to pattern match it against the correct naming convention in JavaScript. Make sense? All right. So that would match against lorem ipsum dir over here, which we're going to implement here with function lorem ipsum dir. Right. And what are we going to do? We're going to fill in the content of that tag with dummy text, right? So we'll do. We're going to return a link function and implement it up here, right? And we're going to use jQuery to do that, right? So we're going to say grab me the element, and I'm going to append. I'm going to append in here the context, right? The content which we don't have somewhere here. Where's the lorem ipsum? I'm going to grab that and I'm going to paste it in here. Right? So if we go back and refresh this, we have the lorem ipsum there as we would expect. Everybody okay? All right. How about if we instead use another div, right? So this is div here, right? And right now it's an empty div, right? And we use lorem ipsum over here, right? Notice that it adds it as well. See that? Okay. So the behavior of directives is that they can be either mapped to an element name, they can be mapped to an attribute name, or they can even be mapped to a class name, right? The default is that they are mapped to all three. right? You can use it either as an element, you can either use it as an attribute, or you can use it as a class, right? It will be parsed by the Angular engine, right? And it will look for the implementation on the in JavaScript, okay? Now, why would you use it as an attribute? Well, the thing here is that if you have an element name, it's pretty much set in stone, right? You can't really add any more. Well, I guess you could add maybe attributes here to further configure this attribute, but it's only applicable to an element of name lorem ipsum. What if I want to use that behavior in many different element types, like a div or an h1 or whatever? Say I want this to be h1. Right? There it is, right? It's h1, right? And the content is just injected into the h1, right? Right? So it allows me to use it in many different other places, right? It allows me to apply it into many different places, right? So let's leave this in a div. This is disturbing such a large h1. But it allows me to combine different things. Right? For instance, I could have another directive, right, that says directive, right, and webdev -red, right, and red, implemented here, right, or webdev red foreground color. That's a good name, right? Right. And guess what it does, right? It grabs whatever you give it, right, and turns it in red foreground color, right? That's a nice little behavior that we can just grab and reuse it anywhere we want, right? Almost like class, right? But then you would ask, well, why don't we just use class, right? But let me just show you, just humor me for a second. So let's return and again link. Right, and we have the link function, and let's implement the link function right here. Oops. And return that. Okay, and we're going to use the elements, and then CSS, and say color, then red. Yes? So we can just, for instance, say that I want to color just this one over here, just this div over here. I want to say webdev, what I called it? Oh, webdev. Notice that my IDE is smart enough, right? It understands, right, the naming conventions between the namings of the tags in Angular and the namings of the tag in the HTML. It's smart enough to make the link, right? And there it is, right? So if I refresh, notice that becomes red, right? Anything that I want to turn red, I can just assign it the same thing, right? Webdev, right? And that becomes red, right? And you might say, well, why don't I just use the class, right? Well, but this is only to show you that we can extend it even further, right? We can say, well, before I go on, I just want to show you the naming convention here, right? Notice that I prepended this with a naming with a namespace, right? So that it's unequivocally mine. Right, it's for the web dev course, right? It's not somebody else's attribute, right, or element, and Angular certainly does that, right? Notice that they prepend all their attributes and elements with ng, so it's unequivocally theirs, right? So I don't mistake that by anybody else's attribute, and so it's a good practice, right, to always prepend your particular attributes or elements with a namespace so that it's yours, right? Also, notice here in the implementation, this return. I could have done that, right? But that would be a problem. Would that work? That wouldn't work, right? Unfortunately. JavaScript is pretty lazy. When it sees that return and there's nothing after it, it just returns. Right? It doesn't even bother parsing what's after it. Right? So if you want to return an object, then you need to do this way, or declare an object, right, and then return the object. Okay, all right. So how about instead of using this trivial and useless example, I can say that this is draggable. Right? Now this becomes a little more interesting, right? We can now use this same example. I'm just going to copy this, right? And declare right here. If it's draggable, I'm going to apply the behavior draggable. Right? Draggable. Right? So anything that now I apply the draggable behavior, maybe to this one, webdev. Hello. You make me look better. Okay, so draggable, right? It's now draggable. See that? Now, anything that I want to apply that behavior, or if I have this UL, right, of movies, right? LI avatar, LI Terminator. How about this one? Anybody seen this? The Abyss? Is that how you spell it? ABY? The Abyss. That's also James Cameron. So I would like to be able to make this sortable, right? I could be able to say something like webdev sortable. Wait, did I do this already? Did I create webdev sortable? Really? I don't remember doing it. No. Oh, maybe for the other class somewhere. I'm sorry? Right, I did it for the table, right? But I did it inside of when I declare the because this is dynamically generated, right? This one is generated where? It's generated in the template, right? But then I can apply the behavior from anywhere, right? By just applying the webdev sortable to the UL, to the parent, right? So if I grab this and I declare it in my directive over here, we can say directive sortable, and then implement it here, directive, right? And we can say function web directive and do the same link. Right, so let me copy that and paste them here, and here we're going to do sortable, right? Sortable. Right, so now it's sortable. And so I can just apply that behavior just by, right, just tagging it with the appropriate attribute, and it just becomes sortable. Yeah. So this is a nice little set of library of directives that just allows me to very easily, right, apply certain behaviors here and there. Make sense? Right. So notice that we've been putting everything separate directives inside here of this directive sample. So if I want to be able to use these directives anywhere else, like for instance, this draggable and this sortable, I think that would be useful not only in this example that I'm showing you here, it might be useful, you know, across many projects, right? But notice that right now it's tied to this one single application, right? So I can't like reuse it. I can't reuse it. And a better implementation for this would be to perhaps put all these directives under a reusable container, right, or some reusable module that I can then bring, right, and allow me to use it. And that's exactly what we did for ng-route, right? ng-route, right, it's a separate module that we are loading as a dependency and loading it. So ideally, what we'd like to be able to do, we could put here something like, you know, my directives, right? My directives, and then have all those directives in there, so that if anybody ever wants to use these directives, they can just declare it as a dependency, and then they can use it from anywhere. Make sense? So let's refactor this so that it's in a separate directive. Okay. Let's not do this just yet. Let's give it a name. We'll call it the web dev directives. How's that? Okay. So right now, if we load this, it's going to complain and say, I can't find any web dev directive module. Where is it? Where is it? Right. So let's create that web directive module. For instance, we could put a directory here, and all our directives could be under directives. Right. Let's put here let's create a module here, and we'll call it web dev directives JS, right? And in here, let's create a brand new module, function, Angular module, and we'll call it my web dev directives. So this is Angular, right? Dot module, okay. No dependency. It doesn't depend on any other things, right? So it's a top-level module. Someone's going to depend on this one, right? So there it is. There's a little module. It doesn't do anything just yet, okay? But for now, let's load it as a dependency so that we can remove this ugly error message here. Let's load it here. Let's see, there's our module, and before we load our module, let's load that other module, script, src, and under directives, and it's web dev directives, there it is. So we load that, and notice that now it doesn't complain. It says, yes, I found the module, right? It's an empty module, but at least it found the module, right? It's not complaining anymore. So now we can move the directives that we had declared here, we can put them in that other module, right? So that we can break up large application into smaller ones, and we can start looking at this being modular, right? Like we can be reused across projects, right? We might even come up with a really cool set of directives, put it on GitHub, and folks can start using our own directives, and we can get badges like that, right? So let's move these directives, right? So these two here, right? Let's grab these two directives, right? And grab them here, right? And move them over to web directives. So it'll be declared right here. There they are, right? There they are. So let's refresh, and it still works, right? This is still draggable, and this is still sortable. Okay, that makes sense. All right, So yeah, so we've seen how to use jQuery, right, as the technology that is used behind the scenes to natively communicate and manipulate the DOM directly, right, in its most raw format using IDs and classes and the DOM, manipulating the DOM. We saw how Angular directives use jQuery behind the scenes, right, through to implement directives as a thin layer of abstraction that allows us to interact with the pages in this model view controller design pattern, right? And we saw that we can extend the behavior by creating our own directives, right, and be able to also encapsulate all these directives in a reusable container that can then be reused across many projects. All right? Okay.